St. Joseph County Election Board, regular meeting of August 2nd, 2023 to order. Would everybody please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, our first item to take up after the pledge is Galasius Morgan, the first candidacy update. Tricia, do you want to do that?
Absolutely. So this gentleman came in and he was filing as an independent. He came to Kim a while ago, and he was trying to get signatures and he was talking about it. So then he came back and said he wasn't sure how many signatures he needed for his petition. But he explained, and Donna was standing next to him, I was standing in front of him at the counter, and Kim was at her desk. He said that the state had told him he needed 200 signatures. So
Which office is this?
this is for,
South Bend 4th District City Council.
yeah,
Fourth District?
Yes.
yeah. So Kim and I were going through the Secretary of State, trying to get the numbers, and we came up with 35. Clearly, that was the wrong amount. But I told him, I said, whatever the state told you, they supersede me. I have no say. I mean, at this point, if the state has told you 200, it's 200. You need to follow them. And he said, okay. So I wasn't here when voter registration accepted his petitions, and there were only 39. So because he didn't get the correct number of signatures, we have sent him a certified letter letting him know that his candidacy has been denied because he didn't meet the qualifications.
And what happened with that certified letter?
It's right here because he got returned.
So he's not even at the address that he had that he'd indicated was his address for candidacy purposes?
No, and this is what's on his candidacy paperwork, which I have in front of me.
Or he didn't pick it up, yeah?
One
Or
of
he
the
didn't pick
two.
it up. Okay. Okay, I don't think that there's any action that needs to be taken by the board except just to recognize that his candidacy was denied. Does anybody disagree with that?
I guess I'd be curious as to so this, in case this happens again, how do we calculate things so differently? and-
So I dealt a little bit, I was brought in a little bit with this to give kind of a final count, and it is 2% of the total votes for Secretary of State in the immediately preceding election. So in this circumstance, in the Indiana Secretary of State's race between Destiny Wells and Diego Morales, it was a number. You multiply that times 2%, you delete any fractions and round down. That is the number, according to Indiana code, that is required in order to be placed on the ballot as an independent.
Is it,
So I would actually call for, a point of order in that this is a discussion between the board, not public comment. So Indiana code requires that to be the number of signatures. It's not how many people voted for Diego or how many people voted for Destiny. It's a total number multiplied by 2%.
is that for any independent candidate?
Yes.
Regardless of whether it's council, mayor, clerk?
Unless it is a nonpartisan office, something like school board, that is a completely separate process where you can file as a matter of right rather than by signature or ballot application process.
So is it 2% of the votes that were cast in this county?
In that district.
Oh, in that district?
In that district,
Which
yes.
gets our number so low.
You got it, exactly. So it was, I guess you multiply 50 times 98, so, roughly it was 4,000 some number was the total number of Secretary of State votes amongst all Secretary of State candidates last year. Multiply that times 2%, round down, eliminate any fractions, and that is the number. So the number that produced was 98. And as Mr. Morgan had produced, was it 39?
39.
39. I was asked to advise the office, and I said that doesn't meet the statutory requirement.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have a letter or an email from the Indiana Election Division saying that they never at any given time had spoke with him because the Indiana Election Division does not give petition numbers for local offices. They only do state. So they made it very clear that they had had no conversation with him. And I just wanted to put that on record because I do have the email from, I think it's Valerie from the Indiana Election Division, saying they never spoke with him.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to skip around and go to number 5, vote centers update. Are you also going to give us an update on that,
Yeah,
Tricia?
right now, we have, we're going to have to add 2 vote centers because we have, we need for Roseland, we're going to have a race in Roseland, and we are also going to have one in Osceola. So we need to have 2 vote centers, one in Osceola and one in Roseland, added to our vote center list.
And it's my understanding that we didn't have a primary in
Correct.
Osceola or Roseland?
Correct. The deadline for the town council office, which is what this is, was yesterday. So we do now have to have, as of yesterday, a vote center in Roseland and Osceola.
And do we have one designated that we typically use for those locations?
Osceola, we usually use their town hall. Roseland, I think we've used their town hall. I don't quite remember.
We have used their town hall, but we were trying to be very careful about creating places for people to vote this year that would not be in play next year. And so in looking at the map, I mean, typically, anybody in Roseland and anyone in Osceola could go to any of the 24 vote centers. It isn't specific to that location. So when we reviewed this in the spring, the recommendation was that Clay International Center, which is typically a vote center, we would just staff that because that's about just on the eastern edge of Roseland, basically. If you think about it, Roseland Town Hall is south of Cleveland, International Center is east of the Cleveland and 933 intersection by 3 or 4 blocks, so it's reasonably close. For Osceola, we would look at the Moran Elementary School because it is on the west side of Beach Road, just northwest of the center of Osceola. So that way we would be using vote centers that would also be in play next year.
Sure.
So that people didn't show up in Roseland to vote for Roseland Town Hall, then next year, why can't I vote here again? Because this is where I've always voted.
Sure.
That was at least the way we sort of thought about it in the spring.
Very, very good point. Yeah.
So that would make 26 vote centers. and
Yes.
We would not particularly necessarily need to staff those to the same level we would use for a normal vote center because the people immediately around them would not be eligible.
Correct.
But yeah, that's.
Okay.
So I'll entertain a motion for us to increase our number of vote centers to 26. In other words, to add 2 vote centers, one in Osceola at Moran Elementary School and one near Roseland at Clay International School.
Okay.
And Dave, are those ones that are already on our list?
They are on our list for the general, and the congressional and presidential elections. We used them in 2022, and we plan to use them in 2024. We used them in 2020, so, yeah.
Right, got it,
They already exist on the list of vote centers, so.
got it. I think that when we established vote centers before, we actually had a resolution, as I recall, and that we, as I recall, in the spring, in order to establish them for the primary in the fall, we actually passed a resolution that said this would be effective for this year only. So I even though that's what we want to do, I think we might want to actually go through the resolution process so that it matches what we've done previously. But I think we can, as long as we know what we're doing now, we can go ahead and document it next meeting, I think, in terms of a resolution. I just think it's a little cleaner that way, that it matches the way we do it.
If you recall, in the spring, there was some debate as to whether or not Roseland would have a primary.
Right.
And so on the original recommendation I circulated, it had 25, including Clay International, should Roseland decide to have a primary, and then that was dropped off when they didn't, so.
Okay, so, since, I guess what I'll do is I'll entertain a motion for us to increase our vote centers to 26 from 24, adding in Osceola Moran Elementary School, and adding in Roseland, or near Roseland, Clay International Academy, I think is what it's called, and that we, as part of that resolution, part of that motion, we ask Andrew to draw up a resolution for us that would go hand in hand with, consistent with this motion.
Sure.
All, anybody
So
want
moved.
Anybody second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the matter carries unanimously. And Andrew, since Chuck and I are not paid as attorneys to do legal work, we'll go ahead and let you do that.
Sounds fair to me.
Can you imagine I got this far through the meeting with
Yeah,
that?
I was waiting. I knew it was coming. Yeah.
All right, so now we have the Dave Smith update. And let me say, the first and foremost, most important thing is this young man has a birthday coming up tomorrow, so I want everybody to make sure that,
I don't count them anymore. I'm 29 for like the 35th time.
so as everyone probably recalls, after the certification process a few months ago, Dave indicated that he was looking to reduce his work and maybe even step out. And I've had some discussions with him, and I think others have had discussions with him as well. I spoke with him over the phone once, and I met with him last week. And I also made a presentation to the county council about what I think is we need to do. And I think everybody here, and I think now on county council, thanks to the presentation and also thanks to Diana Hess's comments, believes and understands how indispensable Dave is to our election board. So I'm going to let him present it, but basically what he's willing to do in order to basically transition most, maybe 2/3 of his work, is he's got two people who do the same work that he wants to transition, that he's had his eye on for a while, to basically mentor them into the taking over the work at the next election, and then paying them a little bit extra for the fact that they're basically stepping into a supervisory role. I've informed the county council that might mean that we might run a little bit over budget in the short term, but that by reducing Dave's hourly work, that in the long run, it's gonna be a zero-sum game, I think. So anyway, Dave, if you want to explain it a little bit more, because I think afterwards I'll entertain a motion so we can make sure that we keep Dave on board. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. I want to make a couple of comments just to frame the discussion and a couple of definitions. The first is that I regret the need for having to have a item on the agenda with my name on it. Though I, at this point, think it's necessary. I didn't make my comments at the certification hearing lightly. There were several sleepless nights involved in that. I don't do this work for the money, though the money is okay. My day job pays much more for much less work. I started doing it out of civic responsibility, and my goal has always been to give the best Election Day experience for the voters of St. Joseph County that's possible, at least in my purview. That's what Dave Smith is about. unfortunately, I have some traits that are in my nature. I refer to myself sometimes as a sweeper. If we are trying to get something done and something isn't getting done, I tend to just grab and do it rather than talk about it. And so I've deliberated long and hard out of all this, and there's a lot of reasons that are driving it. I am not a young man, which means 2024 presidential. By 2028 presidential, will I even be, here? But 2032 is likely definitely out of the question. And so the last 4 years, because in 2020 I said this is the last presidential election I'll ever work, which I think I said in 16 too. But anyway, I've been looking for some kind of an exit strategy. So if you look back, I work approximately 10 weeks around each election cycle. So about 20 weeks a year in the on years and no time in the off years. But those hours, in 2020 presidential election, I averaged over 500 hours for those 10 weeks. So you can say that's an average of 50 hours a week. And I likely, given the nature of 2024, likely don't see those reducing to cover everything that I cover. In the primary in 2022, I worked 381 hours over 10 weeks, so that's 38.1 hours. In the general, I worked 360 hours. I was much more efficient. I was truthfully feeling better, and that was 36 hours a week. And in the municipal primary, 372 hours over 9 weeks. It's a smaller election, but that's still a little over 40 hours a week. So as I try and sell my job to someone else, who's going to work 500 hours twice a year and have a day job? And it really requires it. Part of what's expanded my role is technology. It's a bunch of various things, but it's grown over the last 2 decades. I haven't always been in this seat, but it's grown and it's important, and the things that happen have to happen. And so it will be much easier for me to find someone to tutor to take my place if I don't have to tell them that, well, you got to work about 500 hours a week for 10 weeks twice a year, so give up your family life and your day job for that period of time. I happen to be self-employed, so I have that opportunity, although my regular customers get kind of annoyed with me, and several of them said they'd come and talk in public comment and convince you to let me go. But all that aside, like I said, for me, it's the quality of the election, and so in thinking about it, I can't do this forever. So Amy asked to meet with me, and I met with her and some people in the clerk's office in the beginning of June, and I laid out basically my responsibilities, and they've all seen, but it's got a list of the things that I generally do. It is not exhaustive. It's broken into 3 different areas. And then on the back is recommendations for how we should move forward. And bear in mind, all of this was in my head on May, whatever it was, that we were at the certification hearing. But I wanted to force the issue, which is why we're here. Because why now? Next year, this will be impossible. This gives one election cycle at which to kind of get some people up to speed, get some kind of training and testing involved in how this is going to work, and just move forward with the experience. So that's why now. heard nothing, and a couple of weeks ago, I just went to turn in my keys, because that's what I said I'd do. And that sort of kindled a small flame, and so here we are. Definitions. What's my job? What do I do? Nobody seems to really know, but they think I'm important. Okay, well, it's probably because I got something to say about everything, but probably should keep my mouth shut more often. Anyway, technically speaking, I work as a voting machine technician, and I say that because we need to understand the terms. There's several of them that are getting confused, and they're not the same thing. So a voting system technician, which with the advent of vote center techs, we went to calling regular voting machine technicians. By statute, the title is really voting system mechanic, and that comes from the days of the curtain machines, okay? But we kind of have transitioned it into voting machine technician, so if machine is in it, it is one of 8 people that do that work. Technically speaking, there are 4 provided that are Democrats, 4 provided that are Republicans, and then I'm the 9th, and typically my spot is appointed by the county clerk, okay? In historically, this seat was not filled by a machine technician. It was filled by Jeff Dean, I think, was one of the predecessors who was trustee of Penn Township and so forth. At some point in the mid-2000s, he was running for office, and they came to us and they said, you need a new supervisor. They're gonna pick somebody off the street unless one of you wants to step up to do it. Well, the caveat was, and I try not to make my party affiliation any issue in anything I do regarding the election, but you have to be a Democrat. That was the condition because the clerk was a Democrat and it was appointed. So one of my fellow technicians, who had been a technician for a couple of years and was retired, looked at me and said, "I'll do it if you help me, Dave." And so we basically worked together for a decade and a half. He was always after me to quit doing things that weren't our job. I kept saying, well, the election is our job, so I'm going to do it. He stepped down in 2021. So at that point in time, Rita elected to put me in this seat. And so really what they said was, well, we've always considered you to be in charge of them anyway. But, and at some point before that, I was told, if you just change parties, this would all be easier. But I wasn't willing to do that either, so. So there's 9 of us. What do I do with that? Well, I guide the other 8 and train them. Those 8 are indispensable, and my job would be impossible, and we would not have an election without them. What those 8 people do is meet 3 or 4 evenings a week for a few hours to prepare and test over 1,000 pieces of equipment that are necessary for each election. So they work on the neighborhood of 10 hours a week, something like that on average. The week before the election, we switched to days with shipping machines, and obviously election day is a long day. But they are the people who, well, I lay out, these are the steps you need to follow on all 694 freedom votes, and then I manage that process and track it and make sure that we're getting the right results. They do the work. And they are the people that are divided up across the county on election day to answer technical support calls with the equipment. There's no they depend on me to support them, and I do. In other words, when they get a call to go somewhere and they're not sure what it is, they'll say, well, what does it sound like? And we'll talk through things to try and do, but they're the ones that are boots on the ground and do all that work. And by the way, at the moment, we are down to 6. I have a replacement for one of them that we didn't fill in the spring, but there's another one opposite party, so that's one from each party. And I don't know how many of the remaining 6 are coming back in the fall. I haven't polled them yet. A couple of them are older than me. Some of them are only doing it because they have loyalty to me and they want to help me. So that's unfortunate, and I want to talk them into, not hanging around longer, but finding someone else when it's convenient, because, I might disappear, so.
Dave,
Yeah.
can I just ask, I'm sorry, for clarification purposes?
Sure.
You are saying there are 9 vote machine technicians, correct?
Voting machine technicians,
Correct.
correct, altogether.
And these 9 are separate from our vote center techs that are out at the site every day?
Correct, they are completely separate.
On election day.
And
Perfect.
I'll talk about that in a second, but this is important in understanding what I'm trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So, these 8 other people are critical to having an election at all. I'm not going to do 1,000 pieces of equipment. And that number has grown. We went from 240 M100s and 190 Automarks. We added 180 poll pads in 2016. We swapped out the 240 M100s for 150 OVOs. We swapped out the 190 Automarks for 694 Freedom votes. So and now we're adding 45 more poll pads. So we are well over 1,000 pieces of equipment. And in a congressional or a presidential race, we deploy everything in our inventory. Some of them are spares, but they all must be tested. And this process takes time. There's resources that are necessary. There's a schedule that I work out. We have to do so many machines a night. If we fall behind, we work an extra night during the week. So we used to work Monday through Thursday for 2 hours a night. With the gas prices shot up, they looked at me and they said, can we do this in 3 nights and we'll come in a little earlier and leave a little later so we can work 3 hours a night? That's an extra hour, but 2 less trips to and from my house. So I said, sure, but I reserve the right to add that extra day if we fall behind, because we have to have a certain process in place by the public test, by opening absentee voting. We have to meet, and then by shipment, and we have to meet all those deadlines. And so, sometimes we're doing 100 machines a night, but they are the hard workers. And when I was not feeling well in 2022, they covered my butt big time. So they are very important to the process. Vote Center Tech. This was created in coming out of the pandemic. Okay, this is a temporary 2-day position that changes with every election. Voting machine technicians, when they are recruited, we try to recruit them for life, okay? Because every election cycle they learn more, they're more valuable to us. Vote Center techs are kind of similar, but they're a 2-day gig. They are used to set up the vote centers on Monday and to man them on Tuesday, basically to do minor technical support functions, anything that they cannot handle. One of our regular guys will be responsible directly for them, and they'll contact them or me if they're not available, and we'll resolve whatever it is, whether we send someone there or talk them through something over the phone. We give them 3 hours of training at the warehouse and every single piece of equipment, and they work 8 hours on Monday and 14 hours or so on Tuesday. It's a $20 an hour gig. We recruit anybody, doesn't have to be a registered voter, anybody over 18 years of age, has a driver's license, a U.S. citizen, and their own transportation. your game. We'd like them to be people who are reasonably tech savvy. We'll teach them the equipment that they need to know, right? That's a vote center tech. That's a completely different thing. Those were added because in the pandemic, we opened 12 vote centers in the spring, the month late primary, and we got some past technicians. So the 9 of us, we found 3 other people who had recently retired, and we posted one of us at each vote center. Coming out of that election, people said, you know what, we didn't get any technical calls downtown. That was kind of nice. You know, the machines jammed, all those phone calls. Because you were sitting there and they just tapped you and said, you know, sure, I'll come change the paper. I'll fix the ballot jam. Whatever it is, right? So the idea of a vote center tech was born because with 42 vote centers, we're not hiring 42 machine technicians, right? So coming out of that one in the fall, we all agreed that this was important and it should be done. And my only comment, once it was agreed that we should do this, was who is going to do this? People sitting up where you are said, well, you're the most qualified. Okay, so another facet of what I do. Figure out how to market, hire, recruit, interview, schedule, all those people. So like 50 people, because they drop out like flies, okay? We do have a pool of returning ones that tend to do it every time, or almost every time. That is the pool I tap first when we're looking for a regular machine technician. In fact, the one that I didn't fill in the spring that was somebody who didn't come back, we can handle a primary with 24 sites with 7 people. You know, that's not a problem. Probably can handle it this fall, but want somebody to train them. So one of the vote center techs and I had been discussing a couple of times, an opening came up, and she finally said that she really wanted to do it, and she'd leave Florida early because she doesn't come back till April. And I said, well, that's a deal breaker because we need you in March. She said, well, I'll do that. Okay. So, but she worked as a vote center tech in the last election cycle, and she's very capable. So anyway, so whenever I troll, I have a list of people who have done it in the past. There's about 80 of them. I send to that list and ask for anybody who wants to do it again, except for the ones I put on my no-fly list for various reasons, because you've aggravated me. In the spring, those were all returning ones, and we didn't quite have enough. But that was because I elected not to take the time to try and recruit new ones. I got a few inquiries. But again, I'm trying to manage what I'm doing. So on my list of things I do, it falls into 3 areas: the warehouse and the equipment. The warehouse is all of the inventory and supplies and warehouse, the part of the warehouse that is dedicated to election work. The preparation of the equipment, the storage after the election, the ballot storage, payroll for the regular machine technicians, the coordination of the delivery and pickup to the voting locations, inspector bags, training sessions, absentee support, poll pads, freedom votes, OVOs, ballot boxes, and warehouse training of all the vote center techs. Those are the things that I do. One of the reasons for the way it's broken down is that the other 2 areas of responsibility have to be really handled during the daytime. I can't call vote center techs at 9:30 at night. Generally, I sure can't get a hold of anybody in a school. And so a lot of the other work that I do has to be done during the day. And so this is why I'm looking for help. So that set of responsibilities, I'm willing to continue. Truthfully, that's my expertise. That's the part that I enjoy the most, is working with the equipment. Equipment does not talk back to you, generally. And it's very straightforward. The next area is voting locations, and this has morphed over the years, but basically the way this works is you all send out to the sites, get back that they're going to do it, But then we have to have this dance about where in the site is it going to be? What door are the voters going to come in? Will it be okay if I deliver the equipment on this date and pick it up on this date? And will it be okay if we show up on Monday at this time to set it up? These discussions have to happen in the daytime because you won't reach any of these people at night. You can email them, you can call them and leave a message, but they generally call you back at, well, usually while I'm driving to the warehouse in the afternoon. But anyway, so every morning I get up and I look at that list and I say, well, who do I have to contact to get this moving? And then I spend time on the phone, writing email, trying to figure all that out. Additionally, I have also said that we need to visit each of the sites and create a new layout, and that requires a voting machine technician who knows the requirements to set up the vote center. And so communicating with them about sites, a setup schedule, the layouts, and last time I made recommendations for the sites. It's, for some reason, everybody asks me, because I've actually, in 30 years, worked almost every facet of the election. So I probably have the longest knowledge with the continuity in the clerk's office and even this body not really present at the moment. So,
Hey, Dave?
Yeah.
That's not something that you want to continue doing, right?
correct. And so.
Would that make sense, and I'm just thinking out loud, would that make sense that that be, actually come out of the clerk's office? Is there somebody there?
I would
working
like
all
to
day
say
long?
yes, but then I think that it needs to be a specific individual
Yeah.
because they have to be accountable, they have to communicate. You want the same person talking to every site.
Right.
You want to make sure that they are aware of all the things that need to be done. I currently have a regular voting machine technician who I think is interested in serving that way. So, you know, he works 10 hours a week now, he could add another 10 hours a week doing this. He would need to work with voter registration because he would want them present when they did layouts and that kind of thing. But there's a certain point in the process in which it has to be somebody who I work with closely because you have to know what our schedule is for shipping, what our requirements are for setup, and one of the machine technicians would know that better. So my proposal is to give them a little bit more money and have one of them step up to cover those responsibilities. As opposed to the clerks. One of the reasons that I added all those things was because they weren't being done in
I'm a little-
either this or a previous administration, so.
Okay, I'm a little confused with that
Sure.
recommendation insofar as you're going to be basically still supervising the vote machine technicians, right?
Correct.
And then your suggestion is that we have one of the vote center techs,
No, voting machine technicians, the regular machine technicians.
one of the ones who's at the site.
One of the 8.
No, I'm not, that's who you're supervising, right?
Yes, but I'm saying that to handle all the location work, I would designate one of them.
Okay, so now that's what I'm trying to understand is, so you've got your vote center techs who are 60, 70 people, and we need somebody to be on top of that work.
As
to make-
well.
To make sure that.
That's a different area.
Yeah. And,
Haven't gotten to that.
okay, and so as opposed to having the work come out of the clerk's office for the vote location coordinator,
Right.
you're suggesting it be one of your machine techs?
Correct. One of the reasons for that is because really needs to be a person with a single contact number, not a tree, not leaving a message. When they're looking to talk to people and they're available, that's when those discussions need to happen. And they have to have enough knowledge about the whole process to do with the equipment and where it's going to go, that it's the reason I took it on. I mean, I didn't originally work with the contact sheets and all of that. That came out later because some of that wasn't happening very well, but eventually, I would, even going back to 2006, I would get all the contact sheets, and that was when we had 150 sites. And I would call them all to arrange delivery and make sure that somebody would be available to accept the delivery, which wasn't critical then. Now, there's an affidavit that has to be signed associated with it, so that all has to be worked out. We didn't have to set them up the day before. We just had to work out when to deliver them. Now we try and say, this is when we'll deliver it, and then wait for them to object. But that information on when that happens, how that happens, coordinated with the highway department, it's best to have one person who's accountable for that. And so what I'm saying is to give one of the 8 people who work for me a little extra responsibility, have them handle all that, and report to me. I can give them the spreadsheets I use or access to the spreadsheets I use, all of the information that I have, some of which is in a custom database I wrote, but just so that they have all of that, and then can keep me up to date on where we are and what's fallen through the cracks, and I can then ask questions as to what about this, what about that. Just somebody that I see, a voting machine technician I will see 3 or 4 evenings a week, and so I can keep them accountable.
Yeah.
That's really
But
my
how do you-
reason
How
for
do you know they're
using
going to
those.
have that extra 10 hours a week during the day to be given up?
They tell me they will. That would be clearly defined in asking them to do it. I have, in general, discussed my thoughts with the group of voting machine technicians, and that's where I actually thought this voting machine technician would be more interested in the vote center techs. We said, no, I'd like to do the locations. He's used to be an ambulance dispatcher, so he's good on the phone. He's taken classes in emergency management, so accessibility and things like that are all things he very well understands. He knows all the requirements of the equipment because he sets them up and supervises the setup with the vote center techs on the Mondays every election cycle. So I think he's a great candidate, but I wouldn't say that I wouldn't consider someone else. It's just that it does, I think, need to be a single point of contact for the people from the schools and the people from the private organizations that we use to contact with anything. So when I talk to these people, I always tell them, this is how you find, if you have a question or a problem, you call me. And then that way I get access to that information quicker, so.
What would you think of the clerk's office having a single designated person shadow that whole process for the next election, if that's what the clerk's office wants to do, so that we use the guy that the person you're talking about to transfer that, but that we have a second layer of knowledge of that transition for the future? Because that seems to me to be a pretty big job. And I'm only pulling
It's a
from-
huge job.
I'm only pulling from my one experience having to go out to Adams and spend, a better part of the afternoon out there to make sure that they weren't casting votes
Yeah, multiply that by 42.
in
So,
locker rooms.
Yeah.
And another element that I would like to add to this discussion is that certainly I can only speak to my experience with the primary and moving forward. But setting up in my administration, I have 9 full-time people now in what we could call the elections division, the chief deputy of elections, a full-time elections clerk. Now that voter registration is underneath the clerk's office, I have 4 additional clerks in that regard. We have a social media person who is now working part-time for us. And I'm viewing these kinds of jobs that Dave has described as much more administrative kinds of work. The work that Dave and all the technicians do is fabulous, and we couldn't run an election without him. But as for things such as the vote center contacts, recruiting vote center workers, certainly since we do have this many people in the clerk's office already that are dedicated to elections, I would hope that we can use them definitely a resource. I understand what Dave is saying about communication, and that a single point of contact is necessary for clarity and for transparency as well. But I think working within these parameters, we could set roles and responsibilities for people who we're already, the taxpayers are already paying full-time salaries to a lot of these individuals, and I believe that they're very capable individuals and very accountable as well. So I could see setting up, for specific tasks, standard operating procedures, complete transparency about who is doing what and who is accountable to who. I would like to see our clerks taking more of a role in this administrative part, not having anything to do with the technical part, because clerks are not technical people. They were not hired for that. But that's what I think in trying to offload a lot of the work from Dave and the vote machine technicians. I would like to use the clerk's office as in a more robust way.
Well, I agree with both of you, actually. I hear Dave saying we need, at least during this transition period, and that's what we're all about, is transitioning the work so that you're not burnt out. During this transition period, his recommendation is that that person definitely have the technical expertise of a vote machine technician. And I can defer, I just defer to you on that, because I'm not the guy who's out there, and I don't understand all the issues that can come up. But I also think, which is why I suggested, if we had somebody who's just that one designated person in the clerk's office who's shadowing that process, maybe within the next 2 or 3 elections by osmosis, then we've tripled the number of people who have that technical expertise and the administrative skill set. And since the clerk's office has that capacity, I think, right?
Has what?
The capacity to assign somebody to basically shadow this process during the next election.
Right, but just for a point of clarity, you're not talking about the technical machines that the clerk would be back up on, is
No,
that?
no, we're
All
talking
the
about-
administrative duties.
talking about the
Talking
adminis-
specifically
Right.
about vote center location issues.
Right, but there is a component of that it's going to be helpful to have somebody with the machine technical skills to understand where you can go and how you can set up and what you need.
Right, that's one facet of it. The other is, when we deliver and set up will vary based on how everything comes together, when everything comes together, who the vote center techs are. In other words, that's information that has to always be up to date, so that when someone responds, you know what the situation is, so you can articulate and work to get what we need out of the process. I think that, truthfully, some of the work, rather than on the clerk's office, I was in discussions with the school security and building facilities people to try and get them to do some of that work. They aren't great at it. Some are better than others, but we have an opportunity where the fellow who's in charge of facilities for Penn schools is completely with the program. In other words, when we say we're going to use Walt Disney as a vote center, their security people look it over and they send me a building map with the doors identified, the entrances and exits, and everything on there for each of their schools. The difficulty is that while he says, yes, you can get in this day and time, the principal of the building is not necessarily receptive. They work like fiefdoms, is the way it was explained to me. So while the building facility guy says, you will make these people, happy, by letting them in at this time, the principal says, but we have gym class, we have, and this all comes to a head when we show up, as you're now well aware, at John Adams, because we show up to do the setup, and all of a sudden, no, you can't get in, no, you're gonna go in this hallway, you're gonna go, well, I've got 6 or 7 people that I'm paying to stand there and get that all resolved. That's trying to avoid that. So David Gill and I had a meeting with the fellow from South Bend Schools, and the old fellow from South Bend Schools moved to Mishawaka, so he's aware of all the concerns. The fellow who's now in South Bend used to do this very thing for Elkhart schools. And so.
Is it Scott?
Yeah, Scott. And so, it's a marvelous opportunity. In fact, he's the one that said, well, we should designate the same space all the time. We should, and so that doesn't cover the private ones, but what I'm getting at is I don't think that it's entirely something that someone else needs to take on. The fact of the matter is that this is an area that I haven't been able to devote my full attention to. So over the last few election cycles, I have done what is absolutely necessary to make sure it works and make sure we get in. I would have liked to have been more faithful about contacting all of them, but at some points I look at the list and I say, they're probably all right. I know them. We haven't had that issue in the past, and I skip them, so.
But for the most part, the locations that we're using, it's usually the same designated area.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure.
Well, we want it to be. It
Right.
isn't always, depending on whether the building's open or closed.
Okay.
Because they have student security questions. The other things that South Bend School Corporation brought up, their security person, which was not Scott, I can't remember his name, was what happens if there's a bomb scare? What do you do?
I believe the Secretary of State is working on contingency plans right now
I'm
for all
sure.
of those things.
What if
yes.
the power goes out? What if, and many of them were not aware that we need handicap bathrooms accessible to voters and workers, but apparently that's a requirement. But anyway, but all of those need to be had. They need to, every location, we're talking 26 for the fall, 42 for the spring. But ideally, the other problem is principals at the South Bend school system seem, in my mind, to change every election cycle. I don't know what it is, but the tech person in the building is usually the same, but it's always somebody else. So sending to their email address is not usually helpful. You pretty much have to send it to their physical address and then wait to find out who the people are and then start contacting them. But anyway, that whole process takes a good portion of my time that, like I said, has to be done during the daytime because I can't do it at night. I'm skeptical about the clerk's office handling it only because practice hasn't demonstrated that. I'm not solidly opposed to it. Maybe there's a middle ground there, because certainly people making phone calls, the difficulty is that the communication has to be consistent and evaluated for specific criteria. That's the challenge. We can't have one person saying one thing, a different person saying something else, or saying something different to a different place. The problem that always comes out in my experience, when we've done this, is when I talk to them, they said, well, they said we could do this and this would be all right. And I say, who said? Well, I don't know, I got a call. They're very non-specific, and sometimes I'm not sure they're being honest with me. Sometimes, well, that could have happened. I could see how that happened, but you understand why I'm talking about accountability, because at the moment, if they say that, I can say, no, I'm the only one that will communicate that, and that is not what I communicate. I can say it with conviction, whereas Well, they told me this would be all right. Well, who told you? When did they tell you? What did they tell you? You know,
Well, I think, Dave, that's the beauty of having a dedicated someone from the clerk's office who works Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, and that could be the contact person. That contact person, following standard operating procedures, this is their job. And then I can see them coordinating very closely with the vote machine tech for the schools in particular. Again, the clerks would not have the technical knowledge, but working together with the technical side of the vote centers, I think it could be like an administrative and a technical. And if that's set up as the expectation to begin with, very stringent requirements, which I believe this administration has really started with a lot of transparency and just being very organized. I think that it would work. I understand you have reservations, but I would like to say that it would be great to work together on this.
like I said, I'm not strongly opposed. I'm have to see it in action.
That'd be great.
I generally don't judge people by what they say, but by what they do, so.
Well, and that's why I was suggesting that they have somebody from the clerk's office assigned to basically be a shadow person for the next election. So that, and my understanding is that, and I'm going to get to the pay-related question in a little bit, that you want one of your vote center techs.
Voting
to-
machine technicians.
I know, just listen.
Okay.
You want one of your vote center I'm summarizing everything, one of your vote center techs to become a vote center tech supervisor and get paid an additional $5 per hour for their supervisory work to make sure all of the vote center techs are accounted for. You need a voting location coordinator who you
Right.
want to be a vote machine technician
Right.
for the technical part, also to get an additional $5 per hour. And you want to remain on basically as the, I don't know what, the supervisor of the voting machine technicians?
Yeah, well, and I would
Or why
tend to
don't we
think
just
that I
call-
would.
Why don't we just call you the supervisor of, some title that gives you the umbrella title of,
Well, and I would want to obviously manage or supervise the two people in those two roles because well, number one, I'd need to show them what to do, but number two, I would want to be regularly updated on the work so that I knew we were okay.
right, okay. So Chuck, do you have any questions about any of that structurally that he's proposing?
Yeah, I think I understand what Dave is saying, and I guess, trying to think systemically about how the clerk's office would work in terms of having people available. It seems to me that the thing about elections is that you have a very specific job that has to get done and has to get done exactly right within a very specific period of time, and that you can't be distracted by anything else. And I understand when we have a clerk staff of 8 who may be available for elections generally, but my guess is, for example, when we're away from elections, whether it's the summertime or whether it's an off year, those folks will have other responsibilities. But the question is, what happens, my fear would be, what happens to those other responsibilities when the elections become primary and paramount in terms of responsibility? Can they let go of everything else, or is there going to be that pull that's going to detract from the ability to do what needs to be done for the election? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know enough about those dynamics to see how that works. And I understand the advantage of having somebody essentially as a contractor come in and say, this is your job and this is your only job, and then to have somebody to make
Right.
sure this is the job that gets done,
Right.
as opposed to having a broader, this is your job, but don't forget you also have another job or another set of responsibilities. So I don't know how to balance those things out. That's my concern.
Right. Well, I think I can speak to this, maybe Tricia can as well. The people that are working in the elections division work full-time leading up to an election. Like voter registration, they are working in voter registration. There are freeze periods of voter registration as well, when they are unable to do any work in voter registration. And that is, 28 days before the election, or what, yeah. So there are people who are working voter registration who have absolutely nothing to do because they're under a freeze. And I would speak to the elections clerk, who year-round is working toward elections. Right now, because yesterday was the last day of filing, now that provides another opportunity to move to different work with the elections. So I understand what you're saying, but to be working in elections, it is an organic and progressive tasks that happen throughout the election cycle. I can appreciate what you're saying, but I think there are definitely pockets, like at voter registration, when they would be able to be tasked with specific duties. And Tricia is dedicated full-time to the elections as well as the chief deputy of elections. So I think it's worth a try.
So I think it's worth a try as well, with the clear understanding that the reason we're having this discussion is to make sure that we don't lose Dave. And so, and I think Dave's open enough to seeing if it will work with a clerk. And my point of view is that if it does work, it's going to be just an extra benefit for us as an election board. There's not going to be a downside to it. But if it doesn't work, and I think we need to leave that to Dave's determination after the next election, I think we need to be willing to accept that as well. So that's my perspective on it. I think it would be helpful to have somebody shadowing and learning, because that's basically what they're going to be doing, and see where it goes from there. But if it's something that does not deem to be workable, then okay. But I don't think we've lost anything in the effort. I also think that the issue with regard to the pay increases is, I'm not sure that we can, I'm not a budget guy, but I'm not sure that we can go in on this year's budget, on the 2023 budget, and say, we want to change this budget now to increase everybody's pay for this election cycle. But I would like to have a better understanding of our budget, and because our budget runs out of the clerk's office, right? And so this is sort of in the same conversation, but sort of in another one, getting into other business. I would like for us to get regular budgets updates. And I don't know where the clerk's office is with being able to provide that to us.
That's a very good question, seeing as how we just spent months on the main clerk's office budget for the 2024 and presenting that. We were able to spend so much time in clarifying exact line items and things like that, and we were not able to do that for the election board budget just yet, but that would be our next task, is to actually pull out different line items for the budget. It needs a lot more clarity than it actually has. So I would very much look forward to having a very clear election board budget and understanding every line item. And then once we get that clarified, we can provide the budget updates. But as of right now, the election board budget is kind of all lumped together. Tricia, do you want to speak to that?
I think probably the thing that needs the most clarification is the contractual line. I mean, that includes, that line item includes like RBM, no ink, a vote center text. I mean, it's
Voting
very.
machine technicians also, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need that defined.
It's just a big, huge number.
It's just a big, huge lump. And so I think if we could break that down at some point and saying this is what you're going to spend on vote center machine techs, what you're going to spend on the contractual, I mean, RBM and No Ink, I think you can leave that as is because those are contracts. So we
No
have-
Ink will go up with the addition of 45 more poll pads, but not a lot.
I'm sure our friends from Chicago are willing to take a pay cut on this one.
I'm sure.
One for the team.
Well, if you lump it as, it'll keep me happy, maybe.
But I think for the most part, that budget's pretty clear, except for when you get down to the bottom where it gets into the contractual.
Well, I'd like to have that meted out and also where we are in terms of what's already been spent. Because the way I anticipate this in the near future, for budgetary purposes, is there was a reason that I went to the council meeting and discussed this, and that's because I anticipate going back to the council and saying, it's not just that we need to increase our 2024 budget to handle this in the future. We need to ask you to allocate additional funds for the 2023 because this is a transitional thing, and in the long run, it's going to derive to our benefit
I'm
financially.
not sure that it's actually going to cost more. The goofy part of contractual services is that we don't know going into an election how many hours we're going to work. I mean, we really have no clue. We work as the job is needed to be done. And so that number is a guess. It's always a guess.
So where does it,
What I
is there
can
a budget
say-
issue? Is there a budget line that says, here's how much this person gets paid, here's what a voting, you said $20 for vote center tax, does that say that somewhere?
Well, we've said that in our meetings, but it isn't in the budget anywhere that way.
Okay, so we don't have to go back to the council then.
What I would say is, for example, the spring election, we were one person short. So out of contractual services, you only paid 8/9 of what you would have paid, okay?
Right.
So in my estimation in reviewing this, if I decrease my hours and I get paid $10 more than the rest of them, and I add $5 an hour for a third of my work and another $5 an hour for the other third of my work, that should be reasonably revenue neutral.
No,
at least
Dave,
for the
I
year.
completely agree with that. It's just, are you going to be able to reduce your hours in this fall's election?
I
my
will make
understand-
every effort to do that.
My thought was, no, you're going to be training people, so your hours might actually go up.
Hopefully only for the periods of time that I have to show them something. Hopefully
Okay.
they can go off and do at least some portion of the work without my assistance. Otherwise, we're just setting up straw people, so.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that we don't necessarily have to go back to the council
Well, and the other thing that I kind of buried in here was I'm having more and more trouble retaining good voting machine technicians. And so I would like to offer them a little extra money if they stay for longer than a year. Most of you wouldn't have the history, but it sounds like a lot of money, but voting machine technicians are 1099 not employees, but 1099, and that means that they are responsible for self-employment tax, their own benefits, there is nothing taken out of it, and no expenses for travel or mileage. Some of them live a good distance away. Only on setup and election day, we pay mileage. But
Well, you're not asking for that for them for the next election, are you? You're talking about next year?
Well, either next year or even the next election. If they will stay, I would like to pay them a little bit more because of their knowledge and experience. I think the bar should be where it is now, which is 30, because when you recruit someone, you don't know for a couple of election cycles whether they're even going to work out. Sometimes they see the job and they say, ooh, I didn't realize it was like this. It's not for me. Sometimes we observe them and say, don't think this is the job for you. And,
The point I'm getting at is we can
Oh.
increase our budget, we still can increase our budget
For this year?
2024.
Oh, 2024, right.
This was just, we're just at the spot where they have not made final budget decisions, and I think we
Okay.
can go back in the fall and say, okay, so this was what we put out as our budget, but now we've learned this subsequent issue that we really feel the need, and maybe even have you speak to the council, that we need to be able to incentivize these people to stay because they're the heart and the soul of the elections.
The reality is that if we take a guess at what it will cost by adding up all the numbers, it'll be just that, a guess. But if you know what's in contracted services and you know what all of the pieces are, you'll be close.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I don't think that, like I said, I don't think any of these changes will increase the cost. They will just distribute it to other
Okay.
people rather than me. I mean, I'm going through an election cycle where I'm working 40 hours a week, and the technicians under me are all working 10 hours a week,
Yeah.
you know.
All right, let's see if we can, I think that we can wrap this up. I think that I'm going to propose to entertain a particular motion that will address, I think will address everybody's concerns. If not, then we can continue to discuss it. But at this point, I would entertain a motion to follow what I call the Dave Smith plan, to provide him with the authority to hire a vote center technician coordinator who would be responsible for overseeing the vote center tech coordinator's placements and recruiting for the fall election, and would be paid $5 additional per hour for that work.
Right, normally they get $20, so if one of them would step up, I would pay them
I would
25 for the
I
extra
would
work.
propose that we also allow Dave to appoint a voting location coordinator from the midst of his voting machine technicians who get paid $30 an hour, and to pay that person an additional $5 per hour for the fall election. And I would propose that the clerk's office assign one person to shadow that process for the fall election to help increase the knowledge throughout the election board and the clerk's office as to our elections. Would anybody care to make such a motion?
I am feeling like I would like more time to get more specifics on this. I am not comfortable at this point in entertaining a motion for it. I think there needs to be a little bit more discussion, a little more clarity on it. So I, as the clerk, would have a better understanding of what the roles and responsibilities would be. Because it sounds as if, from this motion that you're making, the only clerk, there would only be one clerk that would be significantly involved, and that would be the shadowing person. And I believe administrative tasks could easily be taken over by clerk employees. So I would like a little more clarity before we move forward with that.
Well, we're here, and I think Dave's talked about what he wants to accomplish in order to keep him here. And so I was just summarizing by saying I would entertain a motion. I was just summarizing what I thought was what he's presented and what I thought was what you were asking for. So, I'm not going to let this push to another meeting, because the only time that we've recently learned, the only time that we have the opportunity to have discussions is here. So,
I like the thrust of Tom's suggested motion, but what I would do is amend it somewhat to create some flexibility as it relates to the shadowing part, as it relates to the clerk's office, and not have us direct how the clerk's office observes and learns from this process going forward. So that would be within your discretion as clerk. And it may be one person, it may be 3 people, however you would want to do it. But I do like the idea, I mean, the fall election is looming, and I think that if we try to make more systemic changes now, I think it's going to, it could be disruptive in ways that I think could be problematic for us. So I would like to go along with Dave's suggestion, but defer as it relates to the clerk's side of it to whichever way you think it would work best in terms of observing, and also at the end of the election cycle to get us to have a report back in terms of what is your analysis and assessment of this, because I think here, you know, we're talking about concepts. Dave has a concept based on his years of experience. You have a concept that is based on your coming into the job and what you've observed thus far. And I'd like to kind of see a synthesis of that. And at the end of, after we certify the fall results, and then based on that, that'll give us some time to kind of work through the pros and cons and to see what works best going into the spring of next year. So, and I don't want to hamstring you in terms of how you want to staff the information, you know, gathering and putting this together going forward. But I do like, I think in the short term, this is a good solution, and we ought to go ahead and follow through with it that way. So I would adopt the first parts of what Tom had suggested, what he had called for in a motion, but then on the second part of it, with respect to the responsibility of the clerk's office, defer to you in terms of how you would want to observe and document how the election is working, and then, of course, report back to us in terms of making decisions for next year.
So my only concern about that is, I'm just going to punt the ball back to Dave, was when he talked about historically having unidentified people in the clerk's office weighing in on things made it so much harder to manage. And so, and I'm not hearing also what Amy's saying about we've got the personnel, they're dedicated to this particular work, we want to be able to put them in there. I think that's a good idea too. I just want to make sure that Dave's comfortable basically with Amy's discretion when it comes to the next election in terms of who she puts to work with you on the voting location coordinator work. Does that sound fair?
On the voting location, I think there are other issues as well.
Okay, well, there are, I'm sure.
There are, yes.
But I think that we have to take, what we're about today is retaining Dave. And so I think we can bring up other issues, maybe in emails, and maybe we can bring them up at the next meeting. But what we're about today is retaining Dave through this election cycle and what's it going to take to retain him. So that's why I'm punting to Dave.
Oh, could I make a suggestion, just so the record is clear, that someone, I know, because you articulated what, you know, the motion that you would entertain, Chuck made a slight kind of edit to that. I would suggest one of you two articulate exactly what the motion is again, someone second it and have a vote, just so we're clear.
Well, we will, once I hear back from Dave.
Oh, okay, yeah.
As to whether or not,
Did you want to weigh in, Keith?
yeah. Yeah, sure.
Keith McGinnis from RBM Consulting. I've been in this county for a lot of years right now, since 2009, I think. So I've seen a lot happening, from equipment changes all the way through the whole voting process. And as many of you know, you've been here and I've been here on election. We help operate the elections. And what I'm looking at here from
You're probably pressing the button in the middle of it the way you're holding it.
as I was sitting here listening to everything, I'd like to weigh in a little bit. First of all, I am 100% familiar on what Dave's department does. I am 100% familiar what's done in the clerk's office. And I could probably sit here and ask Dave, if there's some administrative things that you could get rid of and put them over to the clerk's office, I think it would make all the sense in the world, basically because some of the administrative work is a function of state law, and examples in that are probably the bags and everything else with the forms, right? Does that help loosen your load a little bit on that side of it? On the other side of it, with extra people in the clerk's office to be able to do this right now, it may give a bigger balance of what you're looking for. So I think if you take the particulars and does this work, to trade back and forth, I think you'll really come to a happy ending on both sides of it in a hurry. And the other thing I want to add here is we're going into a November election. The November election, in a perfect world, here's how it works. The state provides us with an election calendar, provides us the clerk's office. We, in turn, as the vendor of setting up the ballot and everything, in a perfect world, we meet every one of those dates, right? There's a couple of dates you don't dare miss. And the first date you don't dare miss is the beginning of filing and the end of filing. The next thing you don't miss is that very first day that mail-out absentee ballot goes out, right? Well, here's what happens more often than not. During that whole process, Dave's team can be put in a big bind of getting all that equipment ready, because when we ask the parties to make sure the proofing is done, and it doesn't get done, it slows everything up to get out to the warehouse to get everything checked. The second part of that is how many times have we not had a challenge on the ballot, right? Whether it's a state challenge, local challenge, whatever. But anyway, going into this November election, the ballot's basically done, right? Primary's done. The November ballot is pretty much set. We're going to go into next year, right? Volume, percentage-wise, up, right? 2 ballots now, at least 2 ballots, a Democrat and a Republican ballot. Your volume on that side of it, from a testing standpoint and a proofing standpoint, escalates. What happens more often than not is, wait a minute, we're dragging back, and now all the pressure, okay, we finally got the ballot done. Let's take it out where Dave's team can start working on this. If some of that administrative stuff was relieved from Dave over here and taken to the clerk's office, you have a win-win. Now, what has to happen there is the communications, right? The clerk's office is going to say, where are we on this? Well, that's usually a question to RBM. Where are we? Because we're only talking at the ballot at that point, making sure the ballot's done and certified at that point, right? That's up to us. We, in turn, communicate with Dave's group. And Dave's always well aware of it, sometimes more in advance than we are, believe it or not. And he's had turnover out there, a lot, but it's also on the other end of it. You know, if you look at it, today's world, his percentage of turnover is not bad. Not bad at all. Experience, he can, if you ranked him from 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, he probably has 3 people out there that might be at a 7, Dave? Yeah. Be a good way of looking at it. But that's just my input on this, where I think you can get a pretty good balance of what's going on. The last thing about all this, again, comes down to the 11th hour, and that ballot's got to be ready to go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm hearing the same thing from both sides, that the clerk's office wants to take on additional administrative responsibilities, and Dave wants to get rid of additional administrative responsibilities. So I guess I'm still kicking it back to you, Dave, about, I guess basically what the difference between Chuck said and what I said was, he agrees with the first couple parts, but the third part, rather than just having a person shadow you, that's something that's in Amy's discretion for this next election on who or how many people she assigns to that.
I'm willing to work with it either way. Like I said, I'm skeptical, but I won't really make a judgment until I see how it pans out in actual working
Okay,
relationship. I can definitely, push things off my plate. I mean, in a perfect world, I would just deal with what I like to deal with and wouldn't deal with the rest of it. But I know that in order for the election to go off on time, on schedule, everything to work, that it all has to be coordinated so that it's all available at the right moment and all the stuff is in the right place at the right time, and that's pretty much what I do.
okay. So now I will entertain a motion that Dave's plan be implemented in the following particulars. First, that he appoint from his bevy of vote center technicians a coordinator of the vote center technicians, and that he pay that coordinator, that coordinator be paid $5 additional per hour for that work. Second, that he appoint from his vote mechanics a vote location coordinator who will also be paid an additional $5 per hour above their voter mechanic tech pay. And third, that the clerk's office participate with both the location coordinator and the vote center tech coordinator and Dave to assist in that process at the clerk's discretion for the 2023 election, fall election.
I'll make that motion.
Can I hear a second?
Yes, second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, the measure carries unanimously. Dave, thank you very much. I didn't think we were going to keep you here until your birthday, but we've made an effort.
Guess I'll leave the keys in my car.
Okay, so on to other business. So, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a few things that I just wanted to say quickly. Next week, Tricia and Donna Hurley, voter registration supervisor, and myself will go down to a conference, voter registration conference in Indianapolis. Then we are we have volunteered, because the Secretary of State has asked us to do that, at the voter registration booth at the State Fair down in Indy. So we're going to be doing that on Thursday. Let's see, in my, Tricia's and my certification in election administration, technology, and security class, we are moving along quite well. We have selected a capstone project which will benefit St. Joseph County. Our capstone project is a class entitled Elections 101, where we will inform the public of the language around elections, who is involved in elections, and the election technology as well. Keith and RBM have agreed to provide some voting equipment, which will be at each one of the classes, and we are partnering with the library in doing that. So we have 3 dates that we will be doing our class at the library. That's with our outreach. I have also made contact with Steve Bronizek from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Association Administration. I met him at a technology conference last week, and he is the head of physical security for in the elections division. So he has agreed to come up and do a site visit of our warehouse where we have the storage of the vote machines. He will be coming up on August 30 at 2 p.m. to provide an assessment, a security assessment of our vote machines. So that is about it for my update. So you are welcome to come, Election Board. I wanted to make you aware of that. I will have to request that Brian be there as well at the security assessment for the vote machine in the warehouse.
Want me to be there?
Pardon me?
Want me to be there?
Yes, if you would be there as well, Dave, that would be
Okay.
wonderful.
Can you repeat the date and time?
August 30, 2 p.m., Olive Street Warehouse.
What's the guy's name again? Steve?
Steve Broniarzik.
Yeah, he's with Homeland Security.
Yeah.
So, nice.
Yeah.
And I would beg your indulgence for one other thing.
All right, is it about the runoff election?
No,
Okay.
no, it's
Or the recount?
now
I
now
mean,
that
not the runoff, the
I'm
recount.
apparently staying here for this next election, there are 225 poll pads on skids at the warehouse, and outside of our normal election startup, which would be the beginning of September, I will likely want to start up mid-August to process all of those. While we paid for the poll pads, the physical hardware has to be transferred from the old ones that we're retaining, and some startup steps performed on them to make sure they work. And I assume that we will have to work with the clerk's office to get asset tags put on all of them, for which we will have to provide all their serial numbers. So we will need to get started on that so that that process is completed before we start the regular work for the election, just to let you know.
Dave and I had a discussion too about what had happened at the recount and the issue related to the pay of the people who participated in the recount. So, Dave, I'm just going to ask you to for our next meeting, just to put a bullet point summary of that together, so
Okay.
that we can consider maybe taking some action on that, because apparently the people did not get paid anywhere near to what they normally get paid for.
The
Working
judge was
election.
unaware of what voting machine technicians get paid
Yeah.
when he
So I'd like for
set
that, and then
what he paid them.
the last, my last piece of open business just refers back to the budget question. Tricia, when do you think we could have a budget update by our next meeting?
I mean, they have the budget, so I don't know what you want me to update.
Well, so we have this whole big area, right, that I don't know how much has been spent. I don't know how much we've spent and how much we have for the fall election that's just sitting in some coffer somewhere, or I don't even know where the coffers are. Is it just sitting in the county treasury and then we just tap into it when we spend it?
Sure. I can
So-
get you what,
Yeah, I guess a year-to-date status of where we are on our budget, so that we can have a better idea of what we're looking at in the fall election.
I can tell you,
They come from the auditor's office typically?
no,
No?
no. I mean, because I have access to it. Because I just put in a big order for election material, and it's about 27,000,
Okay.
so.
Any other business? Okay, then we'll move, yes, Keith?
One more thing. Going into November, there has been legislation passed that may allow a county to open ballots the day before the actual election. If that's the case, it's something that we need to investigate, because the other thing about it, if we can do it, we'd sure love to do it in November, because next May can be told different ballgame, right? If you're allowed to do that, then I'm talking more about 2024 right now, just based on the volume, you would be okay with just two high-speed counters. If we're not allowed to do that come 2024, I'd recommend putting another high-speed counter in there.
Okay.
And I guess with that comment, I guess I'd ask council as well, if there are any acts that were enacted by the General Assembly this time that will affect us in this particular fall election cycle.
Sure, I can get an update on that.
And, I kind of scanned through myself, but I didn't see anything in particular. But this is one issue that I think we ought to look at, and then maybe make a decision as to whether it's appropriate to do that, and then how we would do that, because we would have to obviously have staff to be able to work on that process. But I just think we just need to have a good comprehensive look at what's out there.
Certainly.
Okay.
As
Go ahead.
Keith weighed in on what we were talking about with me, I'll weigh in on what Keith just said. I would argue that a third high-speed scanner should be purchased anyway, simply from a redundancy point of view. The two high-speed scanners that we currently have now have several years of age on them, and you would hate to be depending on that to count all your ballots and find out on election day that one of them wasn't working. Two is great, three would be better. And then if he just has to have extra staff to man the third one, if there's a volume increase, then you still have one available.
Dave, would you be the person to price that and give us a report? Or it would be Keith?
That would be Keith.
That would be Keith, okay.
He
I
would
think
quote that for
I think
you.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Just give us an option.
So I think under the open door law, or whatever the official language is of the statute, if more than one of us shows up at the Olive Street security test, that means we're having a meeting.
Well, if you make it a meeting and you advertise it as a meeting, which I think you can easily do, then it's not an issue because it's open to the public and it satisfies the open door law requirement.
Right, but if we just show up, then we're in violation, if we haven't set a meeting, right?
It theoretically, yes. Yeah, I mean, as you guys, as Chuck and you know, I mean, open door laws are highly technical, and it depends on what would occur. As your legal counsel, I would always advise a very cautionary approach. Just declare it a meeting, make it open to the public, and that completely resolves any potential issues.
You planning to go?
I didn't know about it, so I would like to, if it's available, but
So let's set our next election board meeting for August 30th.
Great. At 2 p.m.?
Is it 2 or 2:30, Amy?
2.
2 p.m. at the Olive Street warehouse.
Great.
I think we're now open for public comment. Please remember that your comments, if any, are to be restricted to 3 minutes. Any public comments? Seeing none, I'll move quickly to adjourn, just in case anybody out there changes your mind. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.